The New York Jets are coming off of arguably the most disappointing 2023 season of anybody. This is a team that was considered by many to be Super Bowl contenders after they acquired Aaron Rodgers last offseason. Just 4 plays into the season, however, everything changed once Aaron Rodgers suffered a torn Achilles tendon, ending his 2023 season. Now, if we're being realistic, the Jets were never going to make it to the Super Bowl last year with or without Aaron Rodgers. With that poor offensive line play, lack of depth at wide receiver, uninspired offensive play calling, it's hard to imagine that the Jets were going to make it very far last year. This year, however, the Jets have some great offseason moves, making their playoff chances and by extension their Super Bowl chances even greater. Stick around and I'll break it down for you. Before we get to the content, please be sure to like and subscribe to help the channel grow, and then also make sure you turn on those notifications because you don't want to miss what I have planned for you in July. 2023 was very wishy-washy for the Jets. They brought in Aaron Rodgers, Nathaniel Hackett, and Allen Lazard, but lost Rodgers 4 plays into the season. They brought in Dalvin Cook, but could only get 214 yards out of him. It started to look like they had improved Zach Wilson, but couldn't keep him upright, and really, he never had a chance when you break it down. It's pretty easy for everyone to point at Zach Wilson and claim that he's a bust. The reality is he's never had a top 19 offensive line. He's never had a deep receiving core. Yes, he had Garrett Wilson, but it's too easy for teams to just double team Garrett Wilson, go one-on-one with the other receivers, and then that forces Zach Wilson into a situation where he's either throwing 50-50 balls to the other receivers or he's forcing balls to Garrett Wilson, even though he's not open. So after another disappointing season, the Jets finally moved on from Zach Wilson, trading him and a 7th-round pick to the Denver Broncos in exchange for a 6th-round pick, and the Jets agreed to pay half of Zach Wilson's contract for 2024. I do think it was a great move by the Broncos because it's low risk, high reward. If the problem really was Zach Wilson, then surely Bo Nix will beat out Wilson in training camp. The Broncos can then either keep Wilson as a backup or they can just part with him because all he cost them was a 6th-round pick and $2.7 million. That's nothing to these guys. If Zach Wilson turns out to be a good quarterback in Sean Payton's system in Denver, then that could prove to be a good thing too, because now that gives them some options at quarterback. Obviously, they are going to turn to Bo Nix at some point, but if they think it's best for Bo Nix to sit for a year, they could have him sit for a year behind Zach Wilson. So I don't really see the downside for Denver in that trade. As for the Jets, they decided to replace Zach Wilson with Tyrod Taylor, who spent the last 2 seasons with the Giants, so I guess at least he didn't have to move. The Jets also made some changes to the guys protecting Rodgers, and if it comes down to it, Tyrod Taylor, by signing Tyron Smith and trading for Morgan Moses. The Jets also added some depth at wide receiver by signing Mike Williams, giving Garrett Wilson something he's never had before, a true number 2 receiver. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that everything the Jets did this offseason was brilliant because there have been a few head scratchers. Ryan Mueller wrote an article for The Athletic where he pointed out that there's a lot of issues in the Jets' all-in approach this offseason. For instance, the Jets signed a lot of injury-prone players. Even though I do like some of these moves, if we're being honest, Tyron Smith hasn't played in 75% of his team snaps since 2019. Mike Williams is coming off of a grade 3 ACL tear. Javon Kinlaw, who the Jets signed, he's missed 27 games since 2020. And then there's the puzzling Jets pass rusher situation. Mueller points out in the article that the Jets had 26-year-old Bryce Huff on the team, and they let him walk. Huff went on to sign with the Eagles on a 3-year, $51 million contract. That's $17 million on average. The Eagles then decided to trade Hassan Reddick, who turns 30 in September, to the Jets. Reddick only has 1 year remaining on his contract, and he's been looking for a new deal. Ever since the trade, Reddick has held out and hasn't gone to any offseason workouts for the Jets. And that move, the whole move to get Reddick, is a bit of a head scratcher because you'd think if the Jets are trading for a guy that they know wants a new contract, they'd have that new contract ready when he gets there. But that doesn't necessarily make a ton of sense either, because if they're willing to give a pass rusher a good contract, Well, why wouldn't they have just given that contract to Bryce Huff? Reddick is set to make $15 million this year. Huff's new deal is averaging $17 a year, which means the Eagles were likely offering something like that to Reddick, and Reddick said no. So if you're the Jets, when you go to make that trade, you already knew what Huff got. So you'd know what Reddick already turned down. He already turned down $17 a year. And if you're not willing to give him a new contract of $17 a year, then why trade for him at all? You have to wonder if maybe the problem is that Jets general manager Joe Douglas just doesn't have a lot of leash. After all, Tyron Smith, Morgan Moses, Mike Williams, Javon Kinlaw, and Hassan Riddick all have something in common. They all have 1 year remaining on their contract. Some of those, it was just 1 year deals that they did. But the point is, they've all got 1 year. That's it. The Jets have just over $6 million in cap space right now. But next year, they're projected to have $58 million, which will rank them at the 7th most in the NFL. That's good for a couple of reasons, because first of all, they got to pay their 2022 class, the class that included Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall, Sauce Gardner, and Jermaine Johnson, all of whom are going to be eligible for contract extensions next year. So they got to figure that out, and so it's good that they have a lot of cap space for that reason. But the other reason that it's potentially a good thing that the Jets have a ton of cap space is because it's been widely reported and widely speculated this is potentially the last year for Robert Saleh and for Joe Douglas. The leash is probably pretty short at this point, which is why they're not giving long-term contract extensions to anybody. Because if the new regime comes in and wants to just start fresh and start new, and they want to build the team their way, in their image, with their ideals, then it'd be really good if they can do that. It'd be a lot more enticing for a heavily sought-after coach and GM to come to a place where they're going to have the money and the freedom to do the things they need to do to make the team successful. But if I'm being honest, I don't personally think that's going to happen. I know that the Jets, they got to figure out the Hassan Reddick thing. They got to figure that out. Okay. And I don't love Aaron Rodgers having unexcused absences from offseason workouts. It's eerily reminiscent of his last season with the Packers, when he missed a ton of offseason time, and then they had a new receiving core, and him and the receivers just couldn't get on the same page. And later in the year, they suddenly started to figure it out, and him and his receivers had some chemistry, and they kind of knew what they were expecting of one another. But it was too little too late. The Packers ended up missing the playoffs by a game that year. So if Rodgers and his receivers aren't on the same page early this season, it'll be pretty easy to point backward and go, yeah, but remember missing off-season workouts? That's the time when you build that chemistry with the receivers. That's the time that you guys start to talk things out and figure out, hey, on this route, I need you to do this and that, and all of those types of conversations. You know, you get to tell the receiver what you're looking for, then you start to understand each other, and there can be a lot of nonverbal during the play stuff. When you don't have that because you were missing those off-season workouts, I see that as a problem. Having said all of that, at the end of the day, there's no getting around the fact that the Jets upgraded their offensive line. They upgraded their receiving core, and those are two huge steps they needed to step forward. The defense has been good for a few years now. I wouldn't expect it to take a huge regression depending on what happens at edge. I think they'll be fine on defense. And looking at the Jets' schedule, I could pretty easily see them winning 10 or more games this year. They open up against the 49ers, which is rough, but then they've got a stretch of the Titans, Patriots, Broncos, and Vikings before their schedule gets a little tougher with Bills, Steelers, Patriots, Texans. But then they got the Cardinals and Colts before the bye week. And then the final push of the year is Seahawks, Dolphins ×2, Jags, Rams, Bills. I count 9 wins easy, with a few potentials like the Steelers, Texans, Seahawks. You win 1 or 2 of those, now we're sitting at 10 or 11 wins. You know, most years 10 wins get you in. Maybe if you steal one of the games off of the Bills, that might be enough to win the division even, and then who knows what could happen from there. Now look, do I think the Jets are winning the Super Bowl? Absolutely not. That would not be my prediction. I'm still pretty high on the Chiefs three-peating. But I'm not going to rule out the possibility of a Jets Super Bowl either. If things fall the right way, it's not impossible to think that Aaron Rodgers could lead this team to a Super Bowl. But let me know what you think in the comment section. Are the Jets legitimate playoff contenders, legitimate Super Bowl contenders? How far do you think they can go? How long do you think the leash is for Robert Saleh and Joe Douglas? Is this kind of it? What are your expectations for this season? Especially if you're a Jets fan, I really want to hear from you. I'll reply to as many of you as I can because I love talking football with you guys. And I will catch you next time. Later.